Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast with Boomer Laura and Cutting Edge Clark. We learned that Pope Francis listens to the podcast, and we'll get to that in listener feedback. He's one of the faithful 200. Here's the signpost for today's podcast. We're going to talk about Bukele, and we're going to talk about him before and after, and we're going to try to answer the question everyone has, which is this dude a dictator, or is this dude onto something? We're going to address his ideas and see if what comes out of that. We're then going to go to the heresy of balance and spiritual health. Hopefully that flows into a secondary conversation on whether or not Catholics should fight fire with fire. And we'll get to listener feedback at the end, including what Pope Francis, how he reacted to our podcast. So, got anything else to say, Laura? How are you doing?
Doing good, Clark. Let's go.
Let's go. All right. Nayib Bukele. I hope I'm saying his name right. He is the president of El Salvador. He's finished his first term. He's reelected, and he just got installed for his second term. All right. What he's most famous for is during his first term, he wanted to tackle gangs in El Salvador, which he kind of thinks of as was the de facto government, right? What he did was he did mass incarceration, and he gave himself a 30-day, I don't know, what do you call it? Like emergency powers.
Uh-huh.
Right. The thing is the 30-day emergency powers continually get renewed by whatever the parliamentary system is there. So he's had 30-day emergency powers for well over 2 years. All of that looks suspicious. It looks like he's somehow destroying democracy in El Salvador, if it ever had it, is part of the problem.
El Salvador had the highest murder rate of any country in the world. And also, there's been like a lot of kind of Human Rights Watch type of groups talking about the conditions of the prisoners and due process, et cetera, in reaction to what he has done.
Right. He's getting kind of crucified by people who support liberal democracies or welfare state type democracies. And it's hard to get to the bottom of their criticism. I think what we've already said is the worst thing you can say about him is that he keeps extending emergency powers and that he's done mass incarceration, right? What he's also done is drop the murder rate from the highest to the lowest in the Western Hemisphere. Like you have to go to like Singapore or somewhere to get a lower murder rate than El Salvador right now. So it's now the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. He's also, another fruit of his work is El Salvador had lost a third of its population to immigration, and now they have a massive return of El Salvadorians to El Salvador to the point there's a housing crisis. I think they lost about 3 million people, and about 500,000 people is the estimated number of people returning.
Yeah. And some of the people returning are American citizens, like they were never even Salvadorian citizens. I understood.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they were born in the States.
Yeah.
There's also this interesting thing. Well, the other thing that indicates that he might be a dictator is his haircut. He only combs his hair straight back, and so that also looks kind of suspicious.
Very mobby. Yeah.
But I think when we talk about dictators, we have to get kind of clear about what we're talking about, because history has a way of interpreting people. Like clearly, we believe that Hitler was a dictator, right? The question is like, how did Hitler come to power, and how did he like get this like dictation power, like this way that he proclaims something and everyone just does it? Early in Hitler's career, he tried to rise to power through a coup, and he spent time in jail. But when he actually got power, he got it through democracy, which is weird. You know, it's like democracy can vote itself out. FDR is also interesting because we typically don't think of him as a dictator. But if you look at how much he reshaped the American political scene and how it's almost been on autopilot since, he, like the level of change he created has not been duplicated, since FDR. You could say that Lincoln did more change than FDR, but nobody since FDR has been as influential. And if you look at the 22nd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is limiting the presidency to 2 terms, that's literally passed only 2 years after FDR's death. Like, the people of that day real quick put term limits in effect after FDR, probably because they were disturbed by how powerful that guy was. So both those are interesting because FDR and Hitler kind of arise within democracy, and get powers from democracy, and one is remembered almost universally badly, and one's universally good. So the question with Nayib Talib is, he's basically, I can't find any accusations of where he broke the democratic structure. It appears that he has gotten all this like power through the like legal means.
Yeah. I'm furnishing no examples from history right now, but I feel like there are a lot of people that have been elected, like validly elected, but then, stay in power longer than they should and do whatever they can to hang. Like, that's kind of a common story. And so I think there's just like a part of it, like he says he will be president for no more than 5 years, and so how, I think that question, we have to wait and see the answer to that.
What Laura's saying is that he has now declared that, he'll only be president for 5 years because that's all that's allowed in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you can change constitutions through democratic means, and he could legally stay if people did that.
Yeah.
In a way, I feel like the world has flirted with dictators a little bit. Like during COVID, I was seeing a lot of apologetics for the China's regime, even though they probably caused COVID. But like the way that they could quickly shut down their country, and then, by the way, made a complete disaster of it. But early on, there was a lot of praise because they had an ability to act quicker and more effectively, right? And what was hitting me at that time was Simple House used to have a mission in Nicaragua. And I went down with the guy who founded that mission, Mark Eckstein, and we went through Honduras and Nicaragua on this like whirlwind tour. Like it was kind of cool. We had this like little diesel Nissan pickup, and for like about 10 days, we're like driving around back road, small town Honduras and Nicaragua looking for a mission location, right? And Honduras and Nicaragua were night and day different.
Mm-hmm.
Like Honduras has been a democracy with no civil war for 100 years, and it was very dark, meaning like it felt weird. I felt very like when I would get to certain parts of town, people aren't making eye contact. It felt very dominated by like criminality, but it's a democracy and the U.S. has good terms with it, et cetera, And then when we get to Nicaragua, you immediately noticed it's a dictatorship, more or less, but you immediately noticed that the roads were really straight. It's like the eminent domain was no problem in Nicaragua. They're like, we're building a road. It's going to be as short as possible. Here you go, And so like everything was kind of cleaner and better in Nicaragua. And at that moment when we were there, Nicaragua was the safest place in Latin America, And since then, so my immediate like gut reaction is to, my first gut reaction is to hate all dictators. My second thing was, well, Nicaragua looks significantly better than Honduras. This is weird. Like I would have thought it would look worse, Did I say that right? Nicaragua looks significantly better than Honduras, even though I would have thought based on political theory, it would be worse than Honduras, right? It would not be thriving, Since then, we actually had to shut down that mission because Nicaragua
became unstable.
Yeah. Huge revolt, because of it being a dictatorship. So in a way, like both the China thing and the Nicaragua thing kind of played out, like China's dictatorialness backfired and so Nicaragua's.
Yeah. But I think when you talk about the 30-day, the emergency order, I'm like, well, that's bad. And then I'm like, well, we did that with COVID. Well, we did that with the Patriot Act. I'm sure there's other examples. And
I think so in a way,
I don't
FDR
know what to do
did
with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he usurped powers. And like this idea that the president can just start wars now without Congress is like he usurped power.
Yeah.
That doesn't appear to ever be going back.
I think of that as a negative thing in the US.
I agree.
Yes. So.
Right. So, all right, that's where we're coming from. So we've had a interest in Nayib Bukele because he is so different, and it does appear that most of what he's done has been positive. His speeches are kind of not that great. Like, I watched the acceptance speech of his, re-election. He has a CPAC speech where he went and talked to conservatives in America. They were okay. The CPAC speech was okay. It had some interesting ideas, but his interviews are the best. Like, they're actually just great interviews. And Tucker has one that came out about a month or so ago, but there's also one from right when he first became president. It's like 45 minutes of him talking to a reporter. And he comes off as someone who is self-educated, who's naming the obvious, who's kind of fair-minded and sympathetic with people. He just comes off pretty well, and interesting.
So I didn't watch the first interview that you're talking about, but I watched the Tucker interview, and I think it's like he seems like a person that understands, the arc of history and has like thought about it and studied it, and I think that's surely true of some of our politicians, but not a great many.
I think what he has is rare because he's talking about how he views civilization and history and governance as if he just came to his own opinions. Not like, oh, here's the theory of so-and-so Harvard professor who published, X book. He's like, no, here's my theory and most of his theories are kind of commonsensical, and we're going to talk about this. So the first interview, before he'd done anything, before he'd cracked down on gangs, here's how he kind of comes off. His ideas are that gangs kind of create the problems that they solve. Like he basically has the standard kind of understanding that gangs come from poverty. Like there's no middle class or upper class members of the gang is what he says. And so they're kind of the solution to poverty, but they also cause the poverty. Because you can't have economic development with the gangs.
Because they give you economic opportunity that maybe didn't exist.
Or if your family's hungry, they'll get your family fed, right? They're also causing violence. They're also the solution to the violence.
Yeah.
Kind of like the American mafia. It's like, pay us protection money, you're not going to have any problems, but we will be your problem if you don't pay us, So that's interesting. And what I just described is what an economist would call an equilibrium. Like there's this feedback mechanism that makes the gangs like not go away. They're basically creating what's creating them.
Yeah.
And so he recognizes that and describes that problem. So although we could say poverty causes gangs, or insecurity causes gangs, the instinctual reaction is, well, then you have to eradicate poverty and eradicate insecurity, But his take is, no, we got to eradicate the gang in order to eradicate poverty and insecurity.
Well, he says that if I understood him correctly, like a gang arises in poverty because there's a void of like resources and law and order. So there's, it fills this void, but then you eliminate the poverty, but the gang still has the hold. Like you just have to take the gang out. You can't eliminate
the poverty. Like even if you give all this money into it and literally like raise everyone's bank accounts, it'll go right back to poverty due to the gang. And it's kind of like say you're helping someone who's depressed and addicted to social media. There's a feedback mechanism there. The more depressed you are, the more you might go on social media, and social media might also make you depressed. But social media is actually kind of the solution to the depression and the cause, So you have to like just rip it out,
This is like the Aldi parking lot.
Go ahead. What's the Aldi parking lot?
Aldi tried to like eliminate a little, section of the chain of a supermarket, by eliminating the person that pushes in the carts, But so now we have an unhired group of people that push in the carts to get the quarter. And it's a pain. And if they weren't sitting on their butts all day trying to get the quarter from your cart, maybe they could be doing something else. But there's like this like incentive that is there to stay in the parking lot and try to get those quarters. But there was a void. There was a void there. And Aldi thought, we can skip this. Does this not happen at your Aldi? This is a problem at our Aldi.
You told me that your Aldi has a liquor store next to it. Mm-hmm. And that could be part of the problem.
I used to have two. Now it's just one, but
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's like a bad equilibrium, right? So how do you break it, you know? And so he had a plan clearly in that first interview. He was very confident they were going to break this, thing. The other thing he did that was kind of very different for a leader to do is he talked about the obvious problem. He's like, look, a third of our people have left our country. They thought our country was so bad that they were willing to, this is going to sound like something I would say, go to another country while not speaking the language, no equal rights, and start from zero, then stay here.
Like they would rather cross through a dangerous desert.
That's actually
and risk
came
their
up
lives.
because part of the interview was talking about Trump was president at the time, and they were trying to slam Trump's, immigration policy and how people were dying in the desert. And he's like, look, our problem is not Trump. Our problem is that our people are so desperate to leave, they're willing to risk dying in the desert, and you can tell that he has a heartfelt, like, this is bad and shameful, and he really doesn't want his people dying in the desert, to the extent you can read anyone's heart. Politicians, I don't put a lot of credit in my ability to tell how sincere a politician is, but that's his argument, and I think it's a sound one, right? This was also right after Trump had called certain nations S-hole countries. What was the word, Laura?
Crap holes.
Oh, okay. That's a better word. That's a different 4-letter word substitute. But anyway, so he'd called these countries that, and Bukele goes, well, I find that we have a certain arrogance of discourse in Latin America that we get very offended that someone would call us that, but I'm trying to not be that. Like we need to take more seriously not being one of those countries, not be worried about what Trump says about us, So he's kind of like very early on, like really owning the issue, like we need to fix ourselves. So then go 5 years later, we have the mass incarceration, we have the state of emergency. Now he's sitting down for a new interview. Now how's he thinking about the world, right? Still got the crazy dictator haircut. That's about the worst thing I can say about him, actually. I also, though, like watch him, like part of the trap, there's a dictator like trap that like, and I think the Nicaraguan dictator is in this trap where it's like, maybe you don't even want to be a dictator anymore, but you kind of can't because you're going to get killed if you're not. Right?
Yeah.
Like when I was watching him do the acceptance speech for the president and his wife standing by him, and they're both look like they're in their 30s or whatever, I'm like, if this doesn't work, you're dead and your wife's dead. Like, because like if this goes back to any type of gang rule, really bad stuff's going to happen to everyone in your family, And that's a reason to hold on. That's a reason why some people get trapped into holding on to power. That
was, gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. Syrian president?
Assad, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
It kind of just seemed like he and his wife would just prefer to be shopping in London.
Right.
And having a quiet, wealthy life.
My idea has been we need Dictator Island, like kind of like how we sent Napoleon in exile to St. Helena and Elba or whatever. Yeah. We need Dictator Island, and we give them like a really great estate on the island, right? And they can bring as much of their family as they want or that agrees to come. And we give them like $1 million a year Amazon gift card, And then you go to the ruler of North Korea and say, hey, man, you can step away and we're not going to put you under trial and we're not going to do anything that looks like justice to you. You're going to get to live on this island with $1 million gift card, and maybe your grandchildren can return to society without any fear of persecution, And we could let Assad go to the island. It'd be like so much cheaper and better than going to war with these people. It'd be like, hey, just retire to this beautiful island.
That is a funny and interesting idea. The idea, though, is like you kind of get into this power struggle and then everything is working against you to be able to get out, even if you thought it was right too.
Yeah, you're trapped. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to buy people out of the trap. And I think it'd be way cheaper than a military activity, Okay, moving on from my weird idea of Dictator Island. Yeah. All right. So Bukele's ideas. I think we'll go through them one by one because I thought they were interesting and fairly profound, So he has this interesting story about needing to maintain something, that if a building or something's not maintained, it can never last, right? And he says the same is true of our civilization, right? It requires maintenance. And he's kind of pointing to the idea that our civilization has worked really well. Western civilization has been a great success, particularly the U.S., but we have not been maintaining it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like at very face value dysfunctional, And he's not talking woke. He's not pointing his finger. He's just very much like, as an economist would, just pointing at obvious things. And he's saying, California built a 1/4 mile of rail for $11 billion,
or 15 billion,
or 15, whatever the number, right?
Yeah.
And if you attempt to defend that result, it should just be no one should listen to anyone who tries to defend what California did there. That should be on face value, either evil or corrupt or just a failure of civilization, right? At the same time, this California project is not cutting edge. Japan had 320 miles of high-speed rail in 1964. Like, they're just trying to catch up to where Japan was half a century ago, right? And China, since the year 2000, has built 28,000 miles of high-speed rail, right? And we can't get out of our own way to build high-speed rail, right? So he's pointing to that. And then his other major example, then I'll open the floor to Laura's commentary, is the Empire State Building was built in a year. It's funny that also has appeared many times in our podcast, the Empire State Building. And the replacing the World Trade Center when money is no object or anything took like a decade, And then he points out, he goes, how long do you think it's going to take to rebuild the Baltimore Bridge? It should be done in a year. But will it? So what are your thoughts, Laura?
His story about the wall, it's like they were basically building a retaining wall at the bottom of a mountain, and he was like upset because this was a stupid solution. And the thing that stuck, so the person that designed it or built it was like, yes, but everything built by hand requires maintenance. Cause he was like, no, we need like a good solution that we don't have to like keep, supporting or whatever. And I think that is kind of like, I think I tend to think like his reaction to the wall, I tend to think like that, like, yes, we should put like the good solution in place that will be, last for the ages or whatever. And
what's interesting is he still thinks the wall's a bad idea.
I think he
points at it. He points at it as like this interesting lesson he learned from this guy who built a bad wall.
Right. He thinks the wall was bad and maybe an expensive project or whatever. But the with the wall, it's like, something that's going to like slowly crumble and give way here and give way there and whatever. And you can't just be like, well, there was our wall, And I think he compared the train stuff to like, like obesity, like if a person's like a little bit fat, it's like not really a big problem in their life, and still mainly functional and whatever. But there comes a point where where their life is like becoming really bad and maybe they've lost, a lot of kind of normal abilities and function of day-to-day life stuff. And it's like at that point you have to be like, no, stop it. You can't live like this. This is not good for you. And I think that's like the type of maintenance he's describing is like that. Like we've like allowed a glut of like weird incentives and regulation and weird contracting stuff and bureaucracy and all this to develop around projects, right?
I think he's trying to make something like very self-evident. Like these dysfunctions are so self-evident that you should just know that things aren't working. And that was the same point I was trying to make last podcast when I'm like, the U.S. spends as much as the rest of the world combined on defense, and we lost the last 2 wars, one of which to a very poor nation and fertilizer bombs. That should be like so self-evidently dysfunctional that you should be like way past alarm, right? And he's also illustrating this other concept.
Honestly though, I think part of the issue is that there's some disconnect where these things aren't self-evident, where if I feel like a lot of times there's a thing that's like this section of, railway costs $15 billion. You're like, whatever. I don't know. Like, I feel like it doesn't always enter our minds. And then when you like really say like, a quarter mile of high-speed railway cost, and you compare it, I think it brings it home.
You're like, hey, it's not self-evident, right? Well, here's the reason why it's not self-evident is because none of us are dealing in these numbers. If you're a bureaucrat or a politician who this is your livelihood and you see that cost and that result, that should be self-evident. I think what my example is, it's like, well, if you spend more than the rest of the world combined in military, you should be able to beat every poor country with your military. Right. And like, I have a buddy who's like, well, it has to do with political will. It's like, we're there 20 years. I mean, we can't sustain it. Like, what's up, There's also this truth that a contractor told me once, that I was like trying to do this project at Simple House and build it really well. And he goes, the moment you're done with this project, the house starts the process of falling down. So the idea that everyone's house is always falling down is just also the same lesson that your house always requires maintenance. And to not think that is the same thing as having it fall down around you. And you see this as a real estate agent. I see this, like you go into some old person's house who just wasn't up for the maintenance anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you see people that think their house is more valuable and in better shape than it is, Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to his next idea. He points out that democracy has a built-in problem, that there's this incentive for the politician or the governor to give away the treasury. So if you're measuring the treasury for the good of the whole, you might save it for a rainy day, for an emergency, for a war, for a disaster. But if the democracy has this inbuilt mechanism where you can basically buy votes by giving away the treasury, or enrich yourself, which would even be more crooked. And in the case of many countries, he goes, after you've given away the treasury, you give away another treasury. And that's basically the national debt, I felt like that was pretty on point, and I have almost nothing to add to it. All right, next point. He this is an in-between the lines point he's making, that a lot of the things that we sometimes treat like they're transcendental ideas, like meaning like they're just eternally true ideas, are actually pragmatic ideas. My example would be like trial by jury. Like, I believe in the right to trial by jury. I don't believe in it transcendentally. I believe in justice, and it's just a mechanism for the justice. And that we can all imagine a jury trial that was very unjust, for example, right? So whenever you're like meddling with structures within your country, a lot of them are just pragmatic structures that may have ceased to work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He talks about the separation of church and state. He goes like, that worked really well. Separating church and state actually led to better governance in his mind. But that was before there were religions of statehood. And he points out like communism as a religion of statehood, and maybe even now like a woke. They didn't quite name it, but it appeared that he was referring to like a woke initiative currently is also a religion of statehood. Like if secularism itself is a religion, it's separation of church and state no longer makes sense, because you've like handicapped all the real religions, and then it gives an unfair advantage to the stupid ones,
We've kind of talked about this, like how us philosophical Catholics like to, try to dream up like the ideal society and governance, etc., and there are the Catholic monarchists and the Catholic distributists and the Catholic, and
utopians of all stripes.
Right, exactly. And I just I don't know, just that all of those are human institutions which will crumble. That was kind of the takeaway I had from that. And there's like a lot of things that can work. Like there's a lot of things, and the U.S. flourished under democracy, and that was a good idea that has worked in many ways,
I think that's right. And I think the way he put it was, he kept saying everything works until it doesn't,
Yeah, some things work until they don't. What did he call? He called like communist like a theoretical idea that had never worked. What did he say? He distinguished some things that were just theories versus like kind of tested ideas that have
meaning like monarchy actually historically worked
it did work,
until it
right.
didn't, you know. And liberal democracy has worked. The question is, does it just need more maintenance, or has it stopped working? You know. And I was talking to a friend of mine who would be a great guest on our podcast, but he has a politically sensitive job, so he can't be. But he was talking about, we were talking about crises in America, right? And I think another one has not yet even arrived, but is still in the pipe, you know? And he compared it to 9/11, and it's like, well, no, 9/11 was like a sucker punch. It was like everything was working well at 9/11, except we weren't on guard against Islamic fundamentalism. And you could critique, okay, we had, you know, a lot of things you could have a lot of problems with that regime in the US, but it was, it felt functional. The budget had just been balanced, you know, it felt like the government was competent. And but I think the next crisis is going to be much more like an El Salvadorian or Argentinian crisis. It's a very different type of crisis where things don't feel like they function.
I think 9/11, there were governance issues related to 9/11. But I think, overall.
But I mean, like, for example, like, say the year 2000. Tell me governments in world history that were better run than the U.S. government.
Oh, yeah, right. No.
You know, I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, I can't think of many or any, I don't know, maybe Singapore or Hong Kong or something, but like it was not a bad point in American governance. Maybe we were set up for a fall, which might be true, but like at the moment it didn't feel that way. We just won the Cold War, you know, 10 years earlier, and we're kind of riding high, and we just invented the internet. You know?
I guess what I'm thinking, like there were specific warnings that the World Trade Center was at risk.
And we didn't listen to them.
And because of either government interests or bureaucracy or whatever, or financial, you know, where are we going to use this money and where are we going to use that money? They weren't, you know.
I know, but
addressed.
Like every government has problems and major mistakes. You know, it's just like I think it would be weird to characterize America as anything but very successful when it happened.
No, I do agree with that. And also this is only a mistake that's like mistake in hindsight, right? Because if this attack would have happened, we would have never identified as a misspending or It's
not just a mistake in hindsight. I mean, there were people who weren't listened to, could have been listened to.
Right, but we only uncover that because...
Okay, maybe we're disagreeing with
hindsight. It doesn't matter. Means, okay, all right. Overall, at when 9/11 happened, it didn't feel like there were massive failures in our government. It was like,
we weren't building a quarter mile of rail for $11 billion at that moment. All right, but we were getting ready to. Then the last idea that he had that I thought was interesting is... the dollar is a bubble. So the word bubble is misused all the time. So what bubble really means to an economist is when the price is no longer reflecting supply and demand, you know? So I remember when the dot-com bubble was happening, finance professors were saying, I was in finance school at the time, they were saying things like, no matter what profit levels I put into my model, I can't justify the stock price. You know, like even if I put in like as high a profitability as I want to, I can't make these numbers work, right? So there was some euphoric thing happening that made the prices of those stocks unhinged from any projected future profits, which they should be related to, right? And the idea with this like dollar bubble is that we've done so much to undermine the dollar and we haven't realized it yet, you know? And when you realize it, it'll be a massive inflationary event, or maybe not massive. Maybe it'll just happen over time because maybe it will be realized slowly as opposed to quickly. Maybe it won't be a big dumping crash. Maybe it'll be like a slow motion crash, but it would be inflationary. And we've covered this in the Simpleton Podcast before, multiple episodes on inflation. I feel like he's saying something that seems obvious to a lot of, you know, people watching the situation. I believe what he says, and I've made this point, My problem is that I feel like there's something about it that I can't get my head around, which has to do with like the Fed's balance sheet. I don't understand how much money they already printed that's built into the price. And I don't know how to understand that. So part of me doesn't know how much of the inflationary problem has actually already just happened. I don't think it has, though. Like, I don't know. Anyway, that's the troubling part of me is I don't understand. I know that more inflation's coming, but maybe it won't be as bad as I think because maybe a lot of it's already built in. A lot of it, I don't know. It's hard to quantify. So,
can we just talk about one more thing Bukele said? This is another distinctive thing about him. Tucker Carlson basically asked him how he had done, how he had accomplished everything he had accomplished, and he said, do you want the official reason or the unofficial reason? And I was like, oh, like he's just going to come out and say all the shady stuff he did, and the official thing, he describes how he gained control and arrested all these people and and then the unofficial reason, you're waiting for all the shady things. And the unofficial reason is that it was a miracle. And that was great.
One of the things that became clear in this is like, he very naturally thinks that like, if you're in a country where the majority of people believe in God, that politicians would pray, and that would even be democratic. Even if there's a secular state, your politicians would still pray. And we've gotten to the point in the U.S. where that historically was a norm, praying on the Senate floor type thing. But we've gotten to the point where that's actually a taboo, even though it's not clear that the majority of people wouldn't be okay with it, So that's just kind of an interesting point that was stuck out too, was that like in real democracy, why is there, that kind of shows the state religion actually took hold,
It just admitted, it's like the problem defied a human answer to some extent, and right. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Okay, so the balance heresy. All right. The spiritual health and balance heresy. All right. So this was pointed out by the great Father Adam a long time ago, that balance is kind of a heresy. And I was thinking about it because it would not be weird right now to show up for a retreat or a talk or a night of reflection at a Catholic church and have someone say, we all, are healing from something. We're all trying to restore, this health, and to have like a reflection start that way. Or to like go to a big retreat and then there's like confessional moments for the people in the retreat and they'll say, this happened to me when I was young and I've been getting over this and healing and blah, blah, blah. And
that's always like the last talk on the final night is the person with the biggest, saddest, whatever.
Right. But kind of as if that's the point, or the focus in a way. And, what you've never read before is the biography of a saint where they spent like the first 10 years of their sainthood healing from all the problems that they had. Somehow it's like a very good thing that we heal, but it's a very bad focus. And that's what I think would be interesting to talk about. It's kind of like we talked about early in the podcast, how if happiness is your stated goal and what you're trying to maximize, it's almost impossible to have. So the idea is that somehow when happiness is the objective, it slips through your fingers, And then we also talked about like when you go to read the Bible, you have to kind of have like a reason you're reading it. And there are a lot of reasons that sound good and might be true, but they're kind of not worthy. Like if you're just trying to figure out how to get to heaven, you kind of don't get a lot out of the Bible. You have to have like an even greater reason. Like if you're trying to learn how to love or what love is, that might be a better question than how do I get to heaven? Or if you said, what is the good news has been the interpretive key we've been using, right? So part of the thing with the spiritual life is somehow when you think it's about balance or health, it doesn't work very well. And I think that there's a group of people who listen to this who this will bother because maybe they've found some value in that. And there's a whole other group of people, including myself, who've always been bothered by this and they couldn't name it, you know? And I think it's because what Christ is inviting us to doesn't actually feel like balance at all. And it's kind of like a balanced sport. Like the one I'm most familiar with is snowboarding, but I bet it's true of surfing and skateboarding too. Like you have to like lean forward on that lean foot for front foot to like make it work. And if you try to remain upright, which would make sense naturally, you don't actually snowboard. You just kind of skid down the mountain.
Like when you get some speed and you're making toe side turns, you have to have your hips like over the board. And when you're making, backside turns, you have to have your hips. And it's a very uncomfortable place. And it's like if you isolated that moment, you'd just be falling on the ground, right? But it's a very uncomfortable place to go. And once you do, it's like awesome. Like it's like the best feeling,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the kingdom of heaven a little bit. It's like if you're worried about balance, 8 kids don't make sense, and like what Bishop Barron has achieved with his like institutes and things like this, right? You don't achieve that when you're seeking balance. What you achieve is like a lakefront property and a well-ordered life with remote work.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what you create when you're seeking balance, know? And it's kind of the true with spiritual healing. And this is kind of, also the great Father Adam talked about how kind of like the wounded healer idea that's in Henry Nouwen. It's kind of like, it's not that it's not true. It's just somehow messes you up on your focus if you focus on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're going back to sports, it's like the sport is actually very taxing on your body and the training is very taxing on your body. And when you get an injury, you have to get out of that, the fun part playing the sport, and you have to kind of nurse that injury for a while. And it's like the athlete is going to want to nurse this to get back. It's not like, oh, this is a part of the sport is like nursing my injury, it's like, no, how do I get back into my sport? And I think a lot of times athletes have to get back into their sports, before their shoulder is perfect, before they're, and it's like, if not, you're just not doing the sport ever,
You're pushing yourself to go beyond, a little bit with the healing.
Yeah. And it's like, maybe football is a bad example because people just think it's so extreme you shouldn't play it. But it's like when you go to football, you're like sending your body to, when you play football, it's like you're sending your body to war. Like it's a crazy thing. And it's like if you play professional baseball, like you are playing a several hour sport, like more days out of the week than not, and that's not balance, but.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, though, that like we've all met people or maybe even ourselves that when there's an injury, you're grieving the injury. You're like sad about it. And like when you meet someone who's kind of like treating their bad shoulder that way or whatever it is, you realize they're not going to get better.
Well, I don't know. Like I have like I like to swim, which has to happen very early in the morning, and I have a shoulder issue, and I had to stop swimming, which like really pissed me off for a while. But then there's like a tension of like, am I done with the shoulder injury? Because if I am, that means I have to start waking up at 5:20 in the morning again.
Right. So you're messing up. I'm having a hard time following all these sport analogies, but that's okay.
Sorry.
The point I was trying to make was like I see this same idea in the church in that like I met someone who's great in the church, Monsignor, and he felt like he had grief of the loss of church, grief of the loss of faith, grief of the smallness of the church. And I was like, when I was hearing him say this, I'm like 25, right? And I'm like, I don't care what it once was. Like, I mean, I kind of do, but like, I'm not sitting around here grieving over the church. I want to do something, And even if we're down meeting in the sewers, I still want to be evangelizing. I want to like be building the kingdom. I don't want to be grieving the loss of the kingdom, And there's something like not right about that idea.
It's like grieving the kingdom can be easier than doing the hard work, and,
but it's never rewarding. It's never the kingdom.
Nursing my shoulder is easier than waking up at 5 a.m. to go swim. But I actually like swimming it's just getting over, like the swimming is rewarding once I do it, but sorry, with the sports, I'll stop. It's because you don't really understand sports, Clark.
Laura is the athlete of the podcast. She's also the boomer of the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm sure she cringed when I mentioned me snowboarding because she's a far better snowboarder than me.
I've actually never seen you snowboard, so.
I know I gave it up. I decided it was too bourgeois.
It is. It is.
It is too bourgeois. Yeah. Anyway, what's the point here? There's like this inherent idea that like Christ on the cross is not a symbol of balance, and it's also not a symbol of health. It's a symbol of like an extreme, And I think we recognize this with romantic love, that like you're not supposed to like be in romantic love in some balance. You're supposed to be like I will walk 500 miles and I will, you're supposed to, that type of sentiment, Yeah. And that's, I think, what Christ is calling us to. Mm-hmm. And that there's a way in which we're like falling forward, we're giving with one hand, not counting the cost, not letting the other hand even know what's happening. And it's through this like pouring out of self without thought that you kind of like get everything. And that's the spiritual disposition that somehow balance is working against.
The idea is like everything you're doing is for God, like your whole life, the whole lens, it's all for God, and there's just like no holding back on that. And I think it would be wrong to interpret that as like, you can sleep when you die. like a mother might rest, and it's not because it's me time, it's because she needs to show up for her family,
But it's also not like, I think what you said, you can sleep when you die type idea. It's also not like the marathon runner where it's like a grind. It actually becomes extremely rewarding, and part of it is a supernatural reward, not just a natural reward. Because like if you're gripping your spiritual life and you're giving and, forget balance, it's a heresy, but you're just kind of giving in this kind of like out of your own natural resources, you actually end up burnt out because you somehow weren't quite getting the point, So anyway, I thought this was interesting, and I thought spiritual healing is something that's very common right now that maybe we need to phase out.
Well, I think we want to have a psychologist or therapist come and talk about that maybe in the future.
Only if they're a good one.
No, well, we have someone in mind, hopefully.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that there's this is happening, I think, in secular and like Christian and Catholic psychology, where there's like right now a focus on woundedness, and I think there has been some fruit in this sort of idea or movement or whatever, and for me personally as well. But there's something strange about looking for the woundedness and like dwelling in it for a long time.
So what you said is true. The thing that I'm taking one step further is there's also something wrong in focusing on the healing.
I mean, I guess I think it's...
And it's not really wrong. Like it's right. Like you do want healing and you do want to heal, but somehow you need an even greater goal. And it's like if you went to physical therapy with this idea of like, let me achieve this next little benchmark in physical therapy and kind of get excited and attack it, versus think, I hope I someday get as good as I once was, and that's somehow not the right attitude. And you see it in the spiritual life, kind of like in Protestants, this is a big genre, but in Catholics, it's a small subgenre you'll still run into, where they're always giving their conversion story. And it's like they converted 20 years ago, and that's still their main talk. And it's like, come on, man. Like, what happened in the last 20 years? Yeah, it's obviously something's missing in that idea, right? And when you show up to this retreat and somebody's talking about, hey, I've been Catholic 10 years, let me talk about the thing I'm still healing from. It's like, no, man.
Like this hasn't
get
been
off
true
that
in your life? Yeah.
Right. It's not that it's not that it's not true. It's not that it's not important. It's that the wrong focus, All right. now there's kind of a weird place this also goes, is I've started to wonder the same idea that makes us like worry about the persecution as opposed to the evangelization. I feel like we have this religious instinct to ban things. For example, the one that was big in my life, that's kind of the first example I have, would be like stem cell research, right? Stem cell research involved killing babies. We needed to ban it, and that makes sense. But really the way we solved the problem was by creating new stem cells that didn't involve killing babies, and that's interesting, and like we've been talking about cyborgs and AI and Neuralink and all these things. And there's this instinct of like, but can't we just live without all that? Right? But probably the way we're going to live with AI in a healthy way is by having AI control AI, to have Catholics in that field working on it, create better versions of the technology to control the technology. I think a lot of, if you're a guns rights person, you realize that there's this instinct of, oh, there's gun violence. That's bad. Well, it is bad. Right? Is the answer to ban guns? Or is the answer like, actually you have to like understand violence? Is in a way it's like, yeah, we don't want violence, but maybe the answer to violence is actually security. Meaning like, it's just an interesting idea that maybe, by the way, I looked up that Shakespeare's the one who first said, fight fire with fire, or he said, bring fire to fire. I wonder if we as Christians are too biased towards this idea of banning, which seems to never work.
Yeah.
When a technological issue arises, as opposed to full engagement and addressing it that way.
Like I said before, like I tend to be a Luddite and grieve the ever presence of technology in our lives. But I heard
well, that's what we're talking about. That right there is what we're talking about.
I know.
Right?
I identify
is that actually
with that.
the answer? Or is that actually a temptation?
A concern I have is like the addictiveness of like social media and that these platforms are designed as such, and the algorithm favors like negative news that incites kind of anger and hatred, is an answer banning or censorship or what, and I think,
or a better algorithm. So that's the big question.
Algorithm. Yeah. And it can't, I feel like there's a lot of times when people are like, oh, we just need to do XYZ in society. And it's like, that costs the consumer so much money, or that costs the company and, that puts the company out of business. And it's like, you can't ask people to do something against their interest. And I think the same would be with social media companies. It's like, is there an algorithm that works for them and is better for people, but.
Well, I think the question is, do you outcompete them? And part of this question is like, will beauty actually win? If beauty, like one of the things always working for people who stand for the truth is that the truth's consistent with reality and lies aren't. And that there should be a fruit there that is actually good, that should reinforce the truth. So how do we harness that mechanism as opposed to just say, ban the bad? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to overstate this, but I thought fighting fire with fire was kind of an interesting idea.
I have never understood that saying, because how do you fight fire with fire? Can you do that?
Well, yeah, no, I thought this saying was from forest fire workers, where they will burn strips.
Oh, yeah.
To take away, controlled burns in order to fight the fire, that's what I thought it was from. But I think what it meant, I think when Shakespeare used it, it was much more like they hit at you, you got to hit back, And my take is like the answer to the technology is actually technology. It's not the ban hammer, which I think is a utopian thing, but somehow instinctually as religious people, I think we like that hammer.
Oh yeah.
It feels good to swing that hammer. And
it's also easier. It's also easier than entering the muddy, yucky stuff, but.
One of the things that I was thinking when we were talking about the manosphere is that a lot of the ways we've dealt with things that are ugly ideas is we just refuse to engage and we try to ignore them away. Right.
Yeah.
And anti-racism is kind of like a idea like that. Anti-racism isn't just not being racist. It's like penalizing racism, refusing to acknowledge it, or fighting it, right? And it's like, well, if your government's anti-racist and your State Department's anti-racist and you go talk to like the Chinese diplomat or the Chinese premier, he's like, well, we're an ethno-state. And you're like, well, that's really racist. He'd be like, yeah,
yes,
probably.
We designed it that way.
That's the point, sir. And then it's like, do you just like not talk to that person?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what the banhammer idea is. Like, well, then I'm not going to deal with China. Well, China's 1/5 of the world.
No, yeah.
And the whole Taiwan issue is about ethno-state issues, So it's like, are you going to address the Taiwan issue? Because if you are, you can't do it through this like anti-racist, like we don't ever talk to you again strategy. You have to engage it.
There's like, there's a guy who like converts KKK.
Oh, right.
Guys. What's his name? Do you know
I
his
don't
name?
remember. He's been on Rogan and different things.
Yeah. And I forget how it happened, but he just goes and meets with them one by one, and
he does it. They used to call this the power of one, meaning like one person. It only takes one person to like really change someone's mind about race. It's like, well, I hate all of this race except Joe because Joe's a good guy. And then Joe is like the wedge in which you're going to win with, So he's become that guy for so many KKK people, and they send him his robes and stuff. And he's just a cool guy who hangs out with them and doesn't not communicate.
Right. Because it's like no, you can't ever talk to any racist. Don't give them,
the time of day.
Yeah. Right. Has that ever eliminated a single racist or KKK member or whatever,
Yeah. It's scared a lot of people, made people fall in line sometimes, but it's not clear that it actually deeply works.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if it's created. No, I think that's true. I also wonder if it's also created new racists.
1,000%. That was a prediction of the Simpleton Podcast years ago. That anti-racism makes racism. And it's been true. Like, I mean, just like there is a rise of legit racism because we've rammed things down people's throats and told them, essentially reverse
you are
racism.
wrong, you are bad.
Yeah. All right. Listener feedback.
We have one very exciting piece of feedback that came in the form of action in a speech.
Pope Francis came forward and said that we need AI ethicists. And it sure sounds like he listened to the Simpleton Podcast and was calling people forward.
Yeah. That's what we said, that we needed AI ethicists. And we a few weeks later, Pope Francis at the G7 summit spoke about that.
By the way, I think this is multifaceted. Get your head around what this is, right? I'm giving real advice that, we're going to need sci-fi authors, we're going to need actual ethicists, and we're going to need the computer programmers if you really want to tackle this issue. So if you're in any of those categories, please tackle it. All right. We also got feedback from an interesting person who I think is a new listener who was talking about our Manosphere episode and pointed out the rise in... They were talking about rage baiting, which was a term we should have used to describe what the Manosphere does. But they were also talking about this kind of interesting kind of like, it's almost like the corollary of the Manosphere in the woman sphere. That's like this stay-at-home mom, like over-glorification. And she listed a couple examples. One of the examples was Ballerina Farms. And I actually didn't think that was an example. I thought that was just a great mocking term for overly glorified life at home.
Yeah.
Was it that you were running a ballerina farm? And anyway, it took me a while to realize that that's actually a channel called Ballerina Farm. And I also noted that a lot of it's coming out of Mormons.
Well, the Ballerina Farms will, the example is like, oh, my child is sick. Let me wake up and make them this like health gummy.
Oh, I think I've highlighted this. One second. Let me read what she actually said.
Yeah.
My child woke up sick. He needed a cough drop. I made a cough drop from scratch. It took 11 hours. Yeah. Also, I did it while wearing a ball gown and full makeup. They and he goes, they present the world that this is normal for them, and everyone buys it.
Yeah. I don't know if it was Ballerina Farms or another one, but I watched someone make Fruit Loops for their children from scratch.
Awesome.
And yeah, it's like Tuesday morning, my kids were hungry for some cereal. Since we don't buy cereal, from the store, blah, 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 I decided to give them a little treat. And and it's like 1 million hours later,
Well, I mean, making Fruit Loops.
It is a cool project.
Scratch,
it was like,
ironically, it's a cool project. Do you know what I mean? Saying that this is the way we live is almost a weird project that's probably hypocritical. But like if you were to say, ironically, I wanted to see if I could make my kids Fruit Loops from scratch, that's pretty cool.
At one level, I found it cool because I can't even imagine how to make Fruit Loops, and I know my way around the kitchen, like I can't even like conceptualize. I was like, someone figured this out, but
well, that's kind of my quest this summer, by the way, is that like my family's given up on like Rotel and Velveeta cheese dip. They've decided it's gross, even though it's like historically something that's been part of family gatherings.
Wow.
So I am trying to make gourmet nacho cheese dip.
Oh.
I've already gone through 3 versions.
Okay.
And it's getting better.
Yeah. But do you look up nacho cheese dip? Or I feel like there's a lot of good queso recipes if you look that up.
Yeah, but I don't like traditional Mexican queso is good. I don't want to deny that. But it's not quite the same idea as like Velveeta and Rotel. So what I did was actually I was inspired by the chain restaurant Chuy's. They have something called like a boom boom sauce. So I use that as like people try to recreate that sauce. That's my base, and I'm now working on it to refine it so that by the end of the summer, Dad has the most ultimate nacho cheese sauce.
Okay.
Invite me to parties. I will bring you your nacho cheese sauce.
Great.
It involves like a lot of chicken stock type stuff. The gourmet.
Yeah.
Cheese.
Hey, I have a question going back to our listener feedback. Was there something interesting about it being Mormon?
I don't know.
I feel like there's a image thing with Mormons that they take care of very carefully.
Like it seems like there's a culture within Mormonism, and I don't even mean this negatively, to be a little bit image conscious. Like come off as a very nice person, come off as having it together, etc.
Happy family.
Right. And it's obvious that would translate to being a good influencer.
Yeah.
Right. It is interesting. I think the listener feedback was kind of questioning, like, is this some Mormon evangelization technique or conspiracy thing? But all right. Last piece of feedback. We got some Bible verses from a friend of mine on shame. We spent a long time debating shame on the last episode. I thought it was interesting. In one of the prophetic books, Jeremiah, it says that God will shame Israel, or shame Jerusalem, rather. And once again, sometimes when God does stuff, we're not allowed to. Like exact vengeance is kind of for God, not for us. I also thought what was interesting was some of the wisdom books, like Sirach, talk about shame. And what struck me there was, like when a prophetic book talks about shame, it means that there's almost like a supernatural idea there that God's like communicating. And it just struck me that like books like Proverbs and Sirach and the wisdom books are kind of natural books. Like it's like, hey, we got these cool Proverbs that we discovered that are too good not to include in the Bible. So here you go. All right, Kelly, we're counting on you to re-edit this podcast and make us look a little bit smarter and take out some of the dumb things we said.
Please do.
Please like, subscribe, comment. Your vampire tip. We can't go a whole episode without a vampire tip. Vampires like opera. So this is, and they don't like rock and roll. So if
vampires
you
are kind of classy.
They like things like velvet. They like things like weird lacy curtains. They're kind of goth classy.
They like suits.
Like you would not, you would think it's like plush, like velvet plush, whatever, and like operas actually are this, by the way. One of the coolest things about operas is there's this permission when you go to an opera to be outlandish, like to dress crazy in this like dressed up way, right? You're not supposed to just be buttoned down and like you're allowed to wear a crazy feather hat. You're allowed to do whatever to the opera because like that's part of like the idea of the opera. So
They're
anyway,
also dark a lot of times.
Exactly, which makes a lot of sense. The point is, probably don't go to operas.
Good point.
Right. Okay. If you find yourself loving opera, maybe you need to like back off for your own safety. All right. All right. Like, subscribe, share. Talk to you later, Laura.
Bye, Clark.